The bleachers still smelled like rain from the night before, even though the sun had been out since 7. Elena Whitfield sat in her usual spot, 3rd row, left side. Close enough to see Ethan's face, but far enough that he wouldn't feel her watching too hard. She'd sat in that same spot for 3 years. Marcus used to sit beside her. Now the spot beside her was just a spot. "Elena, right?" She looked up. A man stood at the end of the row, a clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses pushed up into gray-flecked hair. He wasn't Coach Whitman. Whitman had retired in June. She remembered getting the email, skimming it, not thinking much of it. "That's me," she said. "Daniel Cole." He held out a hand, then seemed to reconsider the awkwardness of shaking hands across 3 feet of bleacher and let it drop with an easy laugh. "I'm taking over for the fall season. Ethan's a good kid. Strong backhand. He gets that from his father." The words came out before she could catch them, the way they sometimes still did. An old reflex, a sentence built for a person who wasn't there to hear it. Something in Daniel's face shifted, just slightly. Not pity. She'd learned to recognize pity by now, and this wasn't that. It was something quieter. "I heard," he said simply. "I'm sorry." She nodded the way she'd learned to nod, a small, closed motion that ended the subject without inviting more. He didn't push. That surprised her more than anything he could have said. Practice ran long that day. Elena watched Ethan run drill after drill, his shirt darkening with sweat, his footwork sharper than she remembered it being in the spring. Somewhere in the last year, he'd grown 2 inches without her quite noticing, the way children do when you're too busy just getting through days. At the water break, Daniel jogged over, not to her, to the cooler at the end of the bleachers, but on his way back he paused. "You've been out here every practice," he said. "Whitman told me. Said you never miss one. Nowhere else I need to be. That true? Or is that just something you tell yourself?" She blinked. It wasn't a rude question. It was asked gently, almost like he already knew the answer and was giving her room to say it out loud if she wanted to. She didn't want to. Not yet. "It's true enough," she said instead. He smiled, not much, just at the corners, and jogged back to the court before she could decide what to make of it. The next practice, there was a coffee waiting on the bleacher beside her seat when she arrived. Plain paper cup, no logo. She almost didn't sit down, unsure if it was meant for her or forgotten by some other parent. "It's yours," Daniel called from across the court, not even looking over, like it wasn't a big thing. "You always look cold by the second half." She wasn't cold. She'd never told him she was cold. But she picked up the cup anyway, and it was warm in her hands, and something about that, someone noticing a thing about her before she'd said it out loud, undid a small knot in her chest she hadn't realized was there. She sipped it slowly through the rest of practice and told herself it meant nothing. Coaches were friendly. This was a friendly gesture. That was all. But she caught herself watching him more than she watched Ethan that day. The way he crouched to fix a kid's grip. The patience in how he explained the same drill 3 times to a 9-year-old who kept getting it wrong. The low, easy sound of his laugh when one of the boys mishit a serve into the fence. "Stop it," she told herself. "You're 43 years old. You buried your husband 14 months ago. This is not what this is." But some part of her, some part she'd thought had gone quiet for good, was awake and paying attention, and she didn't know what to do with that. Driving home, Ethan chattered about a new drill Coach Cole had taught them, some footwork pattern he was excited about, and Elena made the right sounds at the right times without really hearing him. "Mom, you're not listening," I am. Footwork pattern. Cross step. You're doing the thing where you say words back at me. She laughed despite herself. Sorry, baby. Long day. He shrugged, forgiving as 14-year-olds are when their mother says sorry and means it. He went back to talking about backhands, about how Coach Cole used to play college tennis, about how he thought maybe this season they'd actually make regionals. Elena watched the road and let the coffee cup sit empty in the console, and thought about a man who'd noticed she looked cold before she'd said a word about it, and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in over a year. Not grief, something that scared her more than grief did, because grief she knew the shape of by now. This was unfamiliar ground, and unfamiliar ground had a way of shifting under your feet before you realized you'd already taken the first step onto it. She pulled into the driveway and sat there a moment before going inside, engine ticking as it cooled, and asked herself a question she wasn't ready to answer. What exactly is it you're driving home from? Practice or something else? The grocery list on the counter said milk, bread, the chicken thighs on sale, Ethan's protein bars. Elena stood in front of it Tuesday morning with her keys already in her hand and found herself thinking instead about what time practice let out. She could run these errands after. She always ran them after. Except practice started at 4, and it was barely past 10, and there was no reason on earth she needed to leave the house yet, except that some quiet, insistent part of her wanted to get there early. She told herself it was about Ethan. She told herself a lot of things that week. By the third practice, she'd stopped pretending to read on her phone between drills. She watched openly now, Daniel running the boys through footwork, correcting a grip here, calling out encouragement there, and every so often his eyes would find hers across the court, and something would pass between them that had no himyamet, only wait. He came over at the water break, same as he had the week before, like it was becoming a pattern neither of them had agreed to out loud. You're here early today, he said. Had nowhere better to be. It was the same answer she'd given before, but this time it felt less like a deflection and more like something closer to true. I'll take it. He sat down on the bleacher a few feet away, not too close, elbows on his knees, watching the boys run drills instead of her. Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer. Go ahead. How long were you married? The question landed soft. No weight of pity behind it, just plain curiosity. And something about the plainness of it made it easier to answer than she expected. 19 years. That's a long time to build a life with someone. It is. She looked out at the court, at Ethan lining up a serve, and felt the old ache rise and settle, familiar now, almost bearable. What about you? Whitman mentioned you're divorced. 6 years now. No kids. Just tennis and an apartment that's too quiet most nights. He said it easily. No bitterness in it. Like a fact he'd made peace with a long time ago. You get used to quiet. Doesn't mean you stop noticing it. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. That Thursday, her sister Renata called while Elena was folding laundry, the phone wedged between shoulder and ear. You've been in a good mood, Renata said, no preamble, the way only a sister could get away with. I'm always in a good mood. No, you're not. You're in a fine mood, usually. This week you're humming. You were humming when I called. Elena hadn't realized she'd been humming. She set down the shirt she was folding. I don't know what you're talking about. Uh-huh. A pause, the kind Renata used like a scalpel. Does it have a name? Renata. I'm just asking. It's Ethan's tennis coach, Elena said, too quickly, and regretted the shape of the sentence the moment it left her mouth, because it sounded like an answer to a question she hadn't actually confirmed was being asked. He's kind. That's all. It's nothing. I didn't say it was something. You were thinking it. I was, Renata admitted, gently now. Elena, it's been 14 months. Nobody would blame you for. I have to go. The dryer's buzzing, Elena said, though the dryer was silent, and Renata let her go without pushing further, the way sisters do when they've said enough to plant a seed and know better than to keep watering it in front of you. Friday, Elena caught her own reflection in the hallway mirror before leaving for practice and stopped. Genuinely stopped, because she didn't recognize the version of herself standing there. She'd put on the blue blouse, the one Marcus used to say brought out her eyes, the one she hadn't worn since the funeral because it felt too much like a piece of a life that had ended. She stood there a long moment, hand on the doorframe, and asked her reflection a question she didn't have an answer for. Who exactly are you dressing for? She almost changed. Her hand actually went to the top button before she stopped herself, before some small, defiant voice inside her, a voice she hadn't heard in over a year, said quietly but clearly, "You're allowed to feel like yourself again." She left the blouse on. At practice, Daniel noticed. Not with a comment. Nothing so obvious as that. Just a flicker of a glance, there and gone, and a small smile before he turned back to the court. Elena felt her face warm and looked away, pretending to search for something in her bag, her heart doing something foolish and fast in her chest. Ethan jogged over during the break, toweling off his neck. "You look nice, Mom." Just felt like it today. He shrugged, unbothered, 14 and blessedly oblivious, and jogged back to the court. But Elena sat there afterward, watching Daniel run drills, feeling the blouse against her skin like it belonged to someone she was only just becoming again. She thought of Marcus. She always thought of Marcus, in the spaces between things, in the quiet moments when nothing was demanding her attention. Would he mind? She wondered. Would he understand that this doesn't erase him? That it's not a replacement, just a small return of something I thought I'd buried alongside him? She didn't have an answer. She only had the sound of tennis balls against rackets, and a man across the court who made her feel, for the first time in over a year, like a woman and not just a widow. She drove home that evening with the windows down, humming without realizing it, the way Renata said she'd been doing all week, and for once, she let herself. The tournament was 2 hours south, which meant an overnight stay, which meant Elena spent the drive down trying not to think too hard about what it meant that Daniel Cole would be in the same hotel as her and Ethan for 2 nights. It's a junior tournament, she told herself. Half the team's parents are staying at the same hotel. This is normal. This is nothing. She almost believed it by the time they checked in. Ethan lost his first match in straight sets, took it hard the way 14-year-olds take everything hard, and spent dinner picking at his pasta and answering questions in single syllables. Daniel sat with the team at a long table in the hotel restaurant, and Elena watched him lean over at one point, say something low to Ethan she couldn't hear, and watched her son's shoulders come down an inch from where they'd been hunched all evening. "What did you say to him?" she asked later, once Ethan had gone up to the room with the other boys to watch a movie, leaving her lingering in the lobby with a coffee she didn't need. Told him Federer lost his first junior tournament too. Told him it's not the loss that matters, it's what he does with it tomorrow. Daniel shrugged, like it was nothing, like he hadn't just handed her son something Elena herself hadn't known how to give him. Kids that age take everything as a verdict on who they are. Sometimes, they just need someone to remind them it isn't. "You're good with him." He's easy to be good with. He's a good kid. A pause. You raised him well. His father raised him well, too, she said, and it came out softer than she meant it to, less like a correction, and more like a small offering, an invitation into something she hadn't opened to anyone in a long time. Daniel didn't flinch from it. He sat down across from her in the lobby's low armchairs, the fountain in the center gurgling quietly, most of the other parents already gone up to their rooms. Tell me about him, he said. Marcus, if you want to. Why? Because I think you don't get asked that enough. Everyone asks how you're doing. Nobody asks who he was. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing the offer, and then, because it was late, and because the lobby was quiet, and because something in her had been waiting a long time for someone to ask the right question, she told him. She told him about Marcus's terrible jokes, the ones he never stopped telling even after 19 years of the same groans. About the way he used to burn toast every single morning and eat it anyway, out of some stubborn refusal to waste it. About the Tuesday in June when he'd complained of chest tightness at dinner and been gone by the time the ambulance turned onto their street, and how she still sometimes reached for the phone to tell him something before remembering. Daniel listened. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer the tired condolences she'd heard 100 times over. He just listened, fully, in a way that made her feel, for the first time in 14 months, less alone in the carrying of it. He sounds like he was a good man, Daniel said finally. He was. Her voice caught just slightly. I don't know how to stop being his wife. Even now, I don't know what that makes me. Instead, you don't have to know yet. Something about the permission in that, you don't have to know yet, loosened something in her chest that had been wound tight for over a year. They sat a while longer, the conversation drifting to easier things. His years playing college tennis, her early career before Ethan, small pieces of two separate lives laid out side by side, like puzzle edges that hadn't decided yet whether they fit. At some point, their hands, resting near each other on the low table between the chairs, were close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin without either of them touching. Neither of them moved their hand away. Neither of them moved it closer, either. They just sat there, in the quiet hum of the hotel lobby fountain, two people who'd both learned the particular loneliness of an empty side of the bed, close enough to feel each other's warmth, and not quite ready, or not quite brave enough, to close the last inch of distance between them. I should go up, Elena said eventually, though she didn't move. You should, Daniel agreed, though he didn't move either. A long beat passed. The fountain gurgled. Somewhere upstairs, muffled through the ceiling, she could hear the faint sound of a movie playing in Ethan's room, teenage laughter drifting down. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Elena. She stood first, finally, and made herself walk toward the elevator without looking back, because she knew, with a certainty that unsettled her, that if she looked back and he was watching her go, she might not have the will to keep walking. She got into the elevator. The door slid shut. Only then did she let herself exhale, pressing her back against the cool metal wall, her heart going fast and unfamiliar in her chest, and ask herself the question she'd been avoiding all night. If his hand had moved 1 inch closer, would yours have moved too? She didn't have an answer. That frightened her more than anything that had actually happened. The rain came sideways that Thursday, the kind that turned practice into a scramble of gathering ball baskets and jogging for cover before anyone got soaked through. Ethan and the other boys piled into a parent's minivan for an early pickup, waving through the fogged window as it pulled away. leaving Elena standing under the clubhouse awning with her car parked at the far end of the lot, and Daniel beside her, coiling a stray length of net cord around his forearm. "You're going to get drenched running for that car," he said. "I'll survive. Wait it out a few minutes. It's supposed to let up." So she waited. The awning was narrow, barely wide enough for the equipment cart it usually sheltered, which meant standing under it put them closer together than the bleachers ever had. Close enough that she could smell rain on his jacket. Close enough that when he reached past her to grab a spare racket bag off the bench, his hand brushed hers, and neither of them pulled away as quickly as the moment called for. "Sorry," he said, low. "It's fine." Neither of them moved apart. The rain kept falling, a steady curtain past the edge of the awning, and the parking lot beyond it blurred into gray. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, soft and far off, and Elena found herself acutely aware of every inch of space between her shoulder and his. 6 inches, maybe less now. She couldn't be certain, because she'd stopped trusting her own sense of distance the moment his hand had touched hers. "Elena!" Her name. Quiet, careful, like he was testing whether he was allowed to say it that way. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. Not the easy, friendly look from the bleachers. Something steadier. Something that had clearly been building for weeks and had finally run out of places to hide. "Tell me to stop," he said, "and I will." She didn't tell him to stop. His hand found hers first, fingers closing slow and certain around hers. And then his other hand came up to rest against the side of her face, hesitant, like he half expected her to step back even now. And when she didn't, he leaned in. The kiss was brief, soft, uncertain at first, then less uncertain when she didn't pull away, her free hand curling into the front of his jacket, without her quite deciding to put it there. The rain kept falling beyond the awning, steady and indifferent, and for one suspended moment there was nothing else. No grief, no 14 months, no ghost standing at the edge of her thoughts. Then it was over, and the world came rushing back in. Elena stepped back so fast she nearly knocked into the equipment cart, her hand flying to her mouth, her heart slamming against her ribs like something trying to escape. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't know which sentence she was even trying to say. "Elena!" "I have to go." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I have to. Ethan's waiting. It's still raining. I don't care." And she didn't, she realized, stepping out from under the awning into the downpour, letting it soak through her blouse within seconds, because the rain was easier to face than the look on his face. Easier than the wild, guilty, achingly alive feeling still humming under her skin. She got to the car and sat there, wrenched, hands shaking on the wheel, and didn't start the engine for a long moment. What did you just do? Not a question. An accusation, aimed at herself, ringing loud enough to drown out the sound of rain on the roof. She thought of Marcus, his face, not as he'd looked at the end, but as he'd looked for 19 years, laughing at his own bad jokes, burning toast, reaching for her hand across the console, on long drives the way it was second nature, the way she'd assumed it always would be. She thought, I kissed someone who wasn't him. She thought, I wanted to. Both thoughts arrived at once, tangled together, and she didn't know which one frightened her more, the guilt or the small, terrible relief underneath it, the feeling of being wanted, of being seen, after over a year of feeling like a ghost herself. She started the car, with hands that wouldn't quite steady, and drove home through the rain without turning on the radio, without doing anything but gripping the wheel and asking herself over and over, a question with no comfortable answer. If it felt that right, why does it feel so much like betrayal? She didn't go back to practice that Saturday. She told Ethan she had a headache, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her head had been pounding since Thursday, though not from anything a pill could touch. Renata's next call, she let go to voicemail. Then she called her back anyway, because avoiding her sister had never once worked in 43 years, and she didn't see why it would start now. "Something happened," Renata said, before Elena had even finished saying hello. It wasn't a question. "How do you always know?" "Because you sound like you're bracing for impact." "What happened?" Elena told her, haltingly, the words coming out smaller than the moment had felt, the way confessions always do. The awning, the rain, his hand, then his mouth, then the sound of her own footsteps, running through the downpour toward a car she could barely see through her own tears. Renata was quiet for a moment. "And how did it feel?" "Renata, I'm serious. Not the guilt. I know the guilt's there. That's not what I'm asking. How did the kiss feel?" Elena closed her eyes. "Like I was alive again. Like I'd forgotten what that felt like." Her voice thinned, and that's the part I can't forgive myself for. "Why not?" "Because Marcus has been gone 14 months, Renata. 14. And I stood under an awning and let a man kiss me like—" She stopped, pressed a hand to her mouth. "Like you're a woman, and not just a widow," Renata said gently, echoing something Elena hadn't told her, but somehow already understood. "Elena, grieving him doesn't mean punishing yourself forever. Those aren't the same thing, even if they feel like it right now. What if I only wanted it because I'm lonely? What if it wasn't really about him, Daniel, at all? What if I just needed someone, anyone, to make me feel less invisible? Does it matter? Of course it matters." "Does it?" Renata pressed, not unkindly. "Or does it just feel safer to make it about loneliness? Because loneliness you can manage on your own, and wanting someone new, that you can't." Elena didn't answer. She didn't have one. That evening, Ethan flopped onto the couch beside her during a commercial break, still in his practice clothes, hair damp from a shower. "Coach Cole asked if you were okay," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Said you missed practice." Her stomach dropped. "Did he?" "Yeah, I said you had a headache." A beat. He seemed kind of weird about it, like extra weird. Ethan glanced up, 14 and more perceptive than she gave him credit for most days. "You guys aren't fighting or something, are you?" "No, baby, nothing like that." "Okay," he shrugged, satisfied, and went back to his phone. Then, almost as an afterthought, "He's a good coach, like, genuinely good. Not just at tennis. He always makes sure everyone feels okay, not just the good players." A pause. "You could do worse than someone like that. Just saying." Elena stared at her son, stunned into silence. "I'm 14, Mom. Not stupid," Ethan said, eyes still on his phone, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "I see how you look at him. It's fine. I liked Coach Cole even before I knew you liked him too." He got up and wandered toward the kitchen, leaving Elena sitting there with her heart pounding, undone by her own son's easy, uncomplicated grace about something she'd been agonizing over for days. She sat with it that night, long after the house had gone quiet, turning the question over the way she'd turned over grief for 14 months, slowly, without forcing an answer, letting it settle into something she could actually hold. She thought of Marcus, and for the first time the thought didn't come wrapped entirely in loss. She thought of the life they'd built, and understood, really understood, not just as words she'd heard from a grief counselor once, that loving someone new didn't erase what had been real. It didn't put an asterisk on 19 years. Grief and living forward weren't opposites fighting for the same space in her chest. They'd been coexisting there all along, whether she'd given them permission to or not. But she also knew, with equal clarity, that she wasn't ready to build something new on top of something unfinished. Not because Daniel wasn't worth it, because she wasn't finished yet, with her own grief, her own becoming, the slow work of learning who she was outside the shape of wife and widow. Running from him wasn't honesty. Neither was pretending Thursday hadn't happened. She picked up her phone and typed a message before she could talk herself out of it. "Can we talk? In person?" "I owe you that much." The reply came faster than she expected. "Whenever you're ready, I'm not going anywhere." She set the phone down, and for the first time since the rain, she felt something settle in her chest that wasn't guilt and wasn't longing. Something steadier than either. Clarity. They met at the courts on a Sunday morning, before anyone else arrived. The nets still damp with dew and the parking lot empty except for his car and hers. He was sitting on the same bleacher where she always sat, like he'd been waiting for her to come find him there, rather than the other way around. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting a careful distance away. "You said you owed me a conversation. I figured the least I could do was show up for it." She laughed softly, despite the nerves sitting heavy in her chest. "You make it hard to stay guarded. You know that?" "I've been told." A small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes, like he already sensed which direction this conversation was headed and was steeling himself for it. Elena took a breath. She'd rehearsed this half the night, and every version of it had sounded rehearsed, so she let it go and just spoke plainly instead. "Thursday was real," she said. "I need you to know that first. I wasn't confused or lonely in a way that made me imagine something that wasn't there. What I felt, what I still feel, it's real, okay? Careful, waiting. But I've spent 14 months learning how to carry losing my husband, and I think I've been doing it wrong, treating grief like something with a deadline, like at some point I'd wake up and be done, and then I could let myself want something again." She looked down at her hands. "The truth is I'm not done. I don't think I'm supposed to be done. Not yet. And it isn't fair to you to start something with someone who's still finishing something else." Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching the empty court, the morning light catching the wet lines on the clay. "I'm not asking you to be done," he said finally. "Nobody gets to put a clock on that." "I know, but I would be asking myself to rush it if I let this become something right now. And I don't want to build anything with you, anything real, on top of something unfinished. You deserve better than being someone's exit from grief. And I deserve better than using you as one, even without meaning to." He absorbed that, nodding slowly, and when he spoke again, there was no bitterness in it, only a kind of steady, aching understanding. "For what it's worth, I don't think you were using me for anything. I think you're just an honest person figuring out how to be honest with yourself, and that takes longer than a rainy Thursday." "I don't want this to be goodbye," she said, and meant it more than she'd meant almost anything in the past year. "I just need it to not be now. Then it isn't goodbye." He held her gaze, steady, unhurried. "I coach your son. I'm not going anywhere. And if someday you come find me and the timing's different, I'll still be here. No promises, no waiting around with a countdown. Just here." That's a generous thing to offer someone who just told you no. "It's not no," he said gently. "It's not yet. There's a difference, and I think you know that better than I do." She smiled unexpectedly, something loosening in her chest that had been tight for days. "You're a good man, Daniel Cole. So is your husband, from what you've told me. I'd like to think that's not a coincidence, the kind of man you let yourself care about." They sat a while longer in the quiet morning, easy now in a way that surprised her. The tension of the unspoken, finally spoken, and no longer sitting between them like a held breath. When she finally stood to leave, he didn't reach for her hand, and she didn't offer it. But the goodbye held none of the ache Thursdays had. Driving home, Elena rolled the windows down and let the morning air move through the car, and thought, for the first time in 14 months, that she could see the shape of a future that included both things at once: the woman who had loved Marcus for 19 years, and the woman who was still, somewhere underneath the grief, learning how to want something new. She wasn't ready yet, but for the first time, not yet didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door left open on purpose, one she could walk through in her own time, when she was finally, fully ready to.